Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is Madeeha Sagheer from Department of Zoology, Bank Road Campus, University of Education, Lahore. Students, hopefully you are doing well. Today we are going to discuss the second part of our topic of the speciation. Right, in our first part we have discussed the introduction and two modes of speciation. So today we gonna talk about the rest of the two modes of speciation. How does these two modes occur, and what is the process behind these kinds of the speciation? Well, okay, students, this slide I have just put to make the continuity our previous part of the lecture. Right, in our previous lecture, in the part one, we have talked about the two modes. We have talked about the theory of geographic speciation, so there's no need to explain it again. We have talked about the allopatric speciation and parapatric speciation in our part one. Now, today we're going to talk about the sympatric speciation and parapatric speciation. Okay, another major mode of speciation is sympatric speciation. Sympatric speciation, as its name suggests, sim means together. So, in contrast to the allopatric speciation, in which the population is subjected to some physical barrier in between. But here, this is not the case. In sympatric speciation, speciation takes place within the population of the species that is being localized in a same area. There is no geographical separation. There is no barrier between them, physical barrier between the populations. But what happened, being present in the same geographical area, they are subjected to reproductive isolation. So let's have the proper definition of sympatric speciation. Sympatric speciation is the evolution of a new species from a surviving ancestral species while both continue to inhabit the same geographic region. Right, a population in a single locality may be adapted different habitats. Sometimes what happen when individuals of the same locality population that is present in the locality is same, but sometimes a group or few individuals subjected to different habitats. So, in response to the different habitats, they have accumulated variability in their genes, in their genetic material through disruptive selection. You know, disruptive selection is also one of the mode of the selection in which the natural selection favors mostly the extreme phenotypical traits, and it does not favors the intermediate traits. So, what happened in sympatric speciation, because of the population individuals inhabit to different habitats while being localized in a same locality, they have, with the passage of time, they have the genetic variability, and ultimately they develop into a new species. Well, some evolutionists and taxonomists debated that geographic isolation is a very important or necessary step in the speciation, in the formation of the new species. But here, one scientist whose name was the Guy Bush, he emphasized that ecological adaptation as an important factor in the speciation. So this what is requirement of the sympatric speciation. In sympatric speciation, area is the same, but because the group of the individuals of a population subjected to different adaptations to their habitats. What is ecology? Ecology is the relationship of organism to its environment. So the individuals that are adapted themselves according to their environment become, with the passage of time, become different from that of the parent population. So ecological adaptation is also very important in the formation of the new species. Okay, now here is a very common, well-known example of the sympatric speciation. With the help of this example, you will understand the concept of the sympatric speciation. So here we have taken the example of the apple maggot flies. Well, 200 years ago, these flies The ancestors of these flies used to lay their eggs only on a plant that is known as the hawthorn. Hawthorns, actually, it is a plant that has it is also has medicinal importance, but it has a small berry-like fruits, and used to these are the apple maggot flies, and these flies, their ancestor of these flies about 200 years ago used to lay their eggs on the berries of the hawthorn plant. These are the berries, right? Small fruit of the plant. Now, what happened with the passage of time? One subset, a small population of apple maggot flies start laying their eggs on the apple trees. These are the apple trees, these are the hawthorn, and these are the maggots flies. So, one population, small subset of the population, started laying their eggs on the apple trees instead of the hawthorns. Okay, what happened here that there is a change in or there is a shift in the host. Previously, all individuals or all members of the maggot flies were used to lay their eggs on the hawthorn berries, and they used to brought up their young ones on the same berries, hawthorn berries. But latterly, what happened that the few individuals of the same species, few maggot flies, a small group of maggot flies has chosen um, some other host, right? So they have chosen the apple plant as their host, and they has that small group that has started laying their eggs on the apples instead of the hawthorn berries. So they have changed their host, right? So once they have that small, while now the point is here, as we are right now talking about the sympatric speciation, so the point is here that the small group has chosen the different host, but while residing in the same geographical area. Both kinds of the main population of the flies, maggot flies, and that small group that has a change or shift in the host, or that has chosen the different host for their eggs, for their young ones, uh, have been resided in the same area. They have not gone somewhere else, so there is no geographical barrier. But what happened, they just have dealing the environment, or there is a difference in the ecological behavior, you could say, right? So once they have chosen that small group of flies, maggot flies, that have chosen the different host uh, for the purpose of their eggs, and for the purpose to brought up their young ones. Once they have chosen a different host, now the offsprings that have been brought up on the apples, later they will lay their eggs on the same apple plant. They will not go back to the hawthorn berries. So with the passage of time, the maggot flies that have chosen the apple as their host will started their own population on the apple plant. They will not go back to the hawthorn berries. Now here in this picture you can see easily that what is happening here. Once first let's read this, right? Once the group of the apple maggot flies selected a different host species from the rest of its kind, and its offsprings became accustomed to domesticated apples, right? And later laid their own eggs in them. Now, the offsprings of that small group that have chosen the apple, their offspring laid their own eggs also on the apple. And this process continued generations after generations, and thereby cementing this shift in the host. Now, here in this picture, you can easily see that what happened here. These are the hawthorn berries, and these are the apples, and these are the flies, maggot flies, that are being brought up on the berries of hawthorn plant, and that are being brought up on the apples. Now they have the changed in their host. Now the male fly of the hawthorn berries will always mate with the female fly of the hawthorn berries, and the female and male and female flies of the apple berries apples, apple plant or apple fruit will mate with each other. They mating couldn't be like this. It couldn't be like this. So there is the it couldn't be like this, like it could never happen that the male fly that has been brought up on the hawthorn berries would mate with the female fly of the apple berries. No, not at all. The female and male of the same plant would mate with each other. So there will be what? There will be the reproductive isolation, right? Once there will be the reproductive isolation, then with the passage of time and with the millions of years, it will lead to the generation of the new species. Here in this next slide, you can easily see this. Now here you can see male and female of apple maggot flies from different hosts could not mate with each other, and ultimately within a passage of 200 years they have been developed into different species. Now this is after the 200 years, this is a separate species, and this is the separate species of the maggot flies. This host shift from hawthorns to apples may be the first step towards the sympatric speciation. In fewer than 200 years, some genetic differences between these groups of flies have evolved, which leads to the speciation. Okay, this is now the pictorial representation of both major types of speciation, that is the allopatric and sympatric speciation. As we have talked in our previous lecture about the allopatric speciation, and now we are taking a sympatric speciation in discussion. But just to make your concept of speciation clear between both major kinds of speciation, I have given this pictorial representation. Now here in this picture you can easily see that this is the main population, right? If this main population is subjected to the allopatric speciation, then what happened? There would be some physical or geographical barrier that isolates the individuals of the population, and that isolates the subpopulation, right? So for allopatric speciation, there must be some physical barrier, but if this population has gone through the sympatric speciation. Now what happened here? Here is the population is not divided or not isolated by means of some physical barrier or geographical barrier, but this kind of speciation takes place because of the change in the habitat, because of the shift or change in the host, as we have talked in our previous slides about the maggot flies. And you can say that they have been subjected to different ecological adaptations, right? So these this kind of speciation is takes place. Now here I have given the geographical isolation and reproductive isolation, but what happened? Reproductive here, both in both cases there is a reproductive isolation. Of course, reproductive isolation is the basic requirement of the speciation. So in both cases, there is reproductive isolation, but here the reproductive isolation is because of the physical barriers. But here there is no barrier. Now here the reproductive isolation is because of the difference in their adaptations to the environment, or difference in their host, that the some group has chosen some one else as their host. So with the passage of time, they got separated from the rest of the population and become the new species, right? Now we can read it that in allopatric speciation, a geographical barrier physically isolates a population and initially blocks gene flow. Gene flow, which I have told you many times, that gene flow is where the transfer of genes or genetic material between the populations. This is what the between the populations. This is what known as the gene flow. So when there is a blockage in the gene flow, this will lead to the speciation. Whereas in sympatric speciation, intrinsic factors, for example, chromosomal changes or non-random mating, alter the gene flow. As we talked in the maggot flies example, that what happened, they did not mate randomly, right? If they did mate randomly, then they could mate with the individuals of the different host, right? But they do mating random they don't mate randomly, but there is a non-random mating. They just do mate with the uh, individuals or with the flies of the same host, and this would automatically ultimately alter the gene flow, right? Genes couldn't be flow once there is a reproductive isolation, then genes couldn't flow, or genetic material couldn't flow from the that small subgroup to the main population, that from the main population to that small subgroup of the apple maggot flies, right? So when there is alteration of the gene flow or blockage or prevention of the gene flow, this will lead to the different kinds of formation of the different kinds of species. Okay, the fourth mode of speciation is the parapatric speciation. In parapatric speciation, actually this speciation takes place because of the distance, right? Groups of individuals that are distant from the rest of the population, but this distance is not being this is the distance. There is no geographical barrier, there is no such other barrier that separates the population or that isolates the population, but population undergoes speciation because of the distance that is being present between the individuals of the same species. Like if we take the example of any population, like we take the example of the plants that this kind of speciation takes place within the population that has been spread on a larger geographical area, right? So what happened when the population is spread in a vast geographical area? The population at the start of the geographical area and the population of the same species that is present at the other boundary of the geographical area being distant from each other, right? So when they are distant from each other, they occasionally they could meet, but with the passage of time, if they stop meeting, they stop traveling from one boundary to the other boundary of their geographical area. This will ultimately lead to the reproductive isolation. Once they don't meet, they don't mate, and they will be like developing into a new species. So let's read it now. Parapatric speciation occurs when a smaller population is isolated, usually at the periphery of the larger group. Right? So, as I have told you that what happened, the small number of individuals, a small group of the individuals get separated or isolated that is present at the periphery of the larger group. Here, suppose in Pakistan there is a main population of the suppose there is a population of an insect, particular species of the insect. So insects that are present in the um, Punjab area, and the insects of the same species that are also spread throughout the Pakistan and present in somewhat in the Balochistan area. So there is a distance between them, right? They are not separated by geographical barriers, they are separated because of the distance. So they are the population that is this is the point usually at the periphery of the larger population. So the population or group of individuals that is present at the boundary line of the larger population get separated and becomes differentiated to the point of becoming a new species. They have become too much differentiated that ultimately they develop into a new species. This is what the parapatric speciation. Well, this is not the sympatric speciation. What happened? Same mean at the same place. The population is present or species is present at the same geographical place, but they are dividing into two different species because of the different ecological factors that they have been subjected to different hosts, like in sympatric, as we have given the example of the maggot flies. So here isolation in case of the parapatric speciation, isolation is by the distance rather than by geographical, ecological or temporal factors, although they may play a part. Geographical, ecological and temporal factors, time related factors, ecological factors, environmental factors, geographical factors, they do play a part in parapatric speciation, but here the major requirement of the parapatric speciation is what? The distance. So once there is a distance, so ultimately with the passage of the time, the individuals that are distant from the mainland would be subjected to different selection pressures, and they have a different environment. If suppose the individuals that are present at the boundary or periphery of the large population have some environmental changes, that environmental changes are not being present in the rest of the geographical area where larger main population is present. So that small group of population that is present at periphery would undergo that environmental changes and undergo the further adaptations that will lead to the differentiation of that particular isolated periphery group from the rest of the population. So it occurs when populations are separated not by geographical barriers such as body of water, but by an extreme change in the habitat. This what I have talked, that there will be a change in the habitat. Species is same, but a small group that is subjected to the change in habitat will adapt themselves to that habitat and ultimately develops into a new species. Okay, here is an example of the parapatric speciation. Let's take an example of the plants. Now here you can see that this is, suppose this is the whole geographical area, right? This whole geographical area is full of the plants of the same species, but the plants that are present in this gray portion, though they belong to the same species, become for some reasons soil become polluted, and soil becomes polluted with different heavy metals, in like it could be zinc, it could be lead, right? So the plants of this portion, though they belong to the same species, will ultimately adapt themselves to the polluted soil and become metal tolerant. Now they have become the metal tolerant, but the rest of the individuals that are present in the same geographical area but at the distant from the this polluted area are intolerant, metal intolerant plant, right? Now here you can easily understand the concept of the parapatric speciation. The speciation takes place because of the distance. When there is a distance, so for the smaller change in the environment could lead to the speciation. Let's read it. Parapatric speciation sometimes takes place when a part of an environment has been polluted, right? This what we have talked. For instance, buffalo grass, right? This is one of the species of buffalo grass. What happened? Some of these plants live near the mines where the soil has become contaminated with heavy metals. Buffalo grass have been spread to the large geographical area, but the grass that is present near the mines um, is subjected to the contaminated soil. So what happened? The plants around the mines have experienced natural selection for genotypes and are tolerant of the heavy metals. Now the plants that are present in the contaminated soil near the mines becomes subjected to this natural selection, and their genotype changes in response to the natural selection, in response to the heavy metals, and after the millions of years they becomes tolerant of the heavy metals. Now they have become a different species from the rest of the population. They cannot breed with the rest of the individuals of the population and undergo the process of the speciation. Meanwhile, neighboring plants that don't live in polluted soil have not undergone the selections for this trait. Now, the plants that are present in the polluted soil have undergone some kind of natural selection for the trait of being tolerant for the heavy metals, and the plants that are present in unpolluted soil will not undergo for this trait, for the metal tolerance, because they are not subjected to the contamination. So two types of plants are close enough that tolerant and non-tolerant individuals could potentially fertilize each other. So they seem to meet the first requirement of parapatric speciation and that of the continuous population. What is the first requirement they met here? That is a continuous population. Population is continuous. There is no geographical barrier. But what happened? There is a change in the soil. One area soil got contaminated with heavy metals, so this will lead to the different selection pressure to that to the grass of that particular area. However, the two types of plants have evolved different flowering times. Because of this, what happened? Okay, still what happened at this point when the two types of plants are close enough that tolerant and non-tolerant individuals could potentially fertilize each other. Now, still at this point, what happened? They could fertilize each other, right? This is the start of the speciation, right? But what happened after developing the trait? Following years, what happened? The two plants have evolved different flowering times. So once they have evolved the different flowering times, now they are no more able to have the gene flow between the main population and between the population that is subjected to the heavy metals or contamination. This change could be the first step in cutting off gene flow entirely between the two groups. Now, once there is the cutting of the gene flow, prevention of the gene flow between the two groups, then after prevention of the gene flow, they are entirely reproductively isolated, and they have undergone the process of the speciation. This what is known as the parapatric speciation, right? Okay, students, thank you so much and have a nice day. Today, what we have talked the rest of the two modes of the speciation. One is that of the sympatric speciation, and another is the parapatric speciation. Take care. Allah Hafiz.